Hello world of YouTube and welcome to the third list in List Week 2022, the top 11 worst albums I spun last year. Now in an effort to sort of make my life less miserable, I intentionally skipped on a lot of records that didn't seem to be getting the most glowing reception. Did I still check out some out of morbid curiosity or out of some weird obligation? I felt like I owed myself and the internet at large to discuss them to some capacity. Sure, but still, even so, normally I would make a top 25 worst on Rate Your Music. I'm not even doing that this year because out of the barometer of ratings I gave, there were far fewer on the lower end of the spectrum. However, I still had more than 11 to pull together, so I slimmed it down to 11, and we're going to talk about them today. As always, these lists are my opinion. You may like some of these records, and that's okay. But either way, give this video a like if you're excited, and let's go ahead and dive on in. While I'd gone back and forth with what was actually going to be on the bottom of this list, I put Sigrid's How to Let Go here for a handful of reasons, one of which being this is sort of the perfect example of a sophomore slump, in my opinion. Like I said in my review, while I don't spin Sucker Punch in full, the overall lack of interest this record left me with was all the more disappointing every time I came back to it. And what I think is also interesting about How to Let Go is that there's even a deluxe edition which seemingly tries to bring these ideas into different lights, and it almost feels like this should have been the proper channel at which some of these songs were meant to be showcased. Don't get emotional. Case in point, Arctic Monkeys The Car takes all of the lushness and grandiosity seen on what I would argue is one of the more interesting sonic pivots I've seen a band of this scale and caliber make, with none of what made that album interesting lyrically. Sure, it's still got all the great tapestry and production style that I enjoy, but none of the lyrics really stick here. Sure, there's a couple songs that have some good movements amongst them, and there's glimmers of some fun songwriting ideas, but by and large, this album is nothing but a flaccid journey through the most dull countryside I could ever imagine an album of this sound exploring. This is what I imagine goes through people's minds when they hear an album like this. A whole bunch of fluffy nothingness with not much to really excite the listener across its runtime. I'm really sinking. Why do I tell myself that I do? I think until Post Malone strikes a better balance between the experimentations he wants to do with the pop singles that are going to make him success, he needs to stick to being a singles artist. I really like Post as a person. He seems like a really nice dude, but his album construction process is consistently a messy thing to observe. And while I'm glad the guy is getting better and he's seemingly trying to fix his own personal problems, the music he's making throughout this process just doesn't do anything for me. I think this album still has some fun highs, but at the end of the day, it is a tonal mess whose components I felt like should have been dissected from each other and fleshed out in their own respective lanes. Living like this, 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 living like, I wanna live. Now there's artists higher up on this list that I would expect to phone in a half-written album, but Brockhampton are not the group that I would put in that same caliber because typically they do a good job at exerting their own frustrations they're facing as a group on record incredibly well. See albums like Ginger, for example. But TM sees what has been an interesting story to follow musically whimper to the finish line while trying to divert from each other in the seemingly fastest way possible. Nobody really came to play here. Everyone just seems like they're trying to fulfill some sort of obligation, and it makes the fans all the more disinterested with what you're bringing to the table. The instrumental palette isn't harnessed well. A lot of the chemistry that you would see from this group is pretty much gone, and any moments that show promise end far too soon to feel like they're leaving an impact on the listener. A band that I've already kind of been losing interest with subsequent releases drops what I would argue is their worst album to date. I discussed this in the discography review for Ghost that I dropped back in October, but I really don't like the production on this thing. While it's got ideas that I think the band could have harnessed well, they don't really do so outside of a couple of shining moments throughout the track listing. I think that this album fails on executing its concept and is produced in all of the worst ways when trying to pay homage to an era that they have done better in the past. This is just a band feeling like a shadow of themselves in all the worst ways. Case in point of an artist I would expect to turn in a half-written, over-bloated record, Drake's Honestly Nevermind really fails to capitalize on its house influence in a way that you could have seen come to promise. Like I said in my initial review, Drake making an album like this kind of makes sense, but man, does he fumble the bag on its execution to the point that he loses interest in exploring this concept by the album's end. Sure, there's an idea I'm trying to pull together with it that I think utilizes it better, but as far as creating a Drake-length album using this sonic idea, it does not come together in any stretch of the imagination. The big difference between Joji Smithereens and all the other underwritten half-baked albums that I put on this list is the circumstance at which the album is released. This batch of ideas is trying to capitalize on Joji's biggest single he's had to date. And I don't blame him for trying to cash in on that bag, but that doesn't excuse this completely irrelevant piece of his discography. Yeah, it's got 2 songs that matter and a couple of ideas that would have been more fruitful had they been fleshed out more, but the finished product that Joji gave us on Smithereens just is not worth your time whatsoever. Hey, walking away, got the wrong kind of mindset. Now you can see these bottom 4 as the true bottom of the barrel, the worst of the worst, and I could see somebody rearranging these 4 given my reviews and my intensity for distaste for them, but I'm putting Disturbed's Divisive in the spot, if only because, yes, albums above this are bad for very similar reasons, but Disturbed's brand of autopilot, it's just the least interesting thing I've heard of its ilk. In a year where a lot of bands that were contemporaries of them were at least pulling together relatively interesting ideas, whether it was Slipknot really trying to further experiment with their sound, or Korn finding a way to make their autopilot work the best that it's ever have amidst their own drama, Disturbed trying to make a bridge between their matured sound and their comeback just left me completely feeling nothing. The riffs feel stock, the production feels way too obnoxious, and David Draymond and the rest of the band sound like relics on this record in a way that none of their contemporaries really had this year.
Holy fuck, holy fucking fuck, the body of yours is absurd. I do anything for it, that's my work.
Extensions from the reggaeton translation don't bring anything fruitful on Black Eyed Peas' Elevate. It's got all the problems from that record with some other injections of more dance sounds that don't do anything to enhance the experience. There's some really cringy tracks on here, some really bad sample choices, and a lot of the collaborations feel like they don't come together all that fruitfully, in my opinion. This is easily another really bad piece of a really bad discography, but to a point that it really feels so unnecessary. I really contemplated making this my #1 record because I really didn't like this in the same way that I didn't like Tickets to My Downfall. But there's an interesting narrative to be spun with this album that can't be said of my #1 pick. Sure, a lot of the production ideals are still really obnoxious. I don't think MGK is a good singer for pop punk at all, and his songwriting gives you a really stark insight into his life and his headspace as a whole in a way that shows that he doesn't really live the most healthy a lifestyle. But all of that said, this does not bring anything nice to the medium of music. This is not a record I would throw on for any circumstance, because while it has the energy of a pop-punk album, it's lyrical tapestry. And again, MGK's frontman status just weighs down the experience in a way that makes it unlistenable to me. With that being said, Muse's brand of bombastic production and tired lyrics make this the most exhausting listen I had in 2022. I like Muse's highs. I still think their greatest records stand high and above a lot of stuff in its era. But Will of the People showcases, again, similarly to MGK and Black Eyed Peas and Disturbed, all of this band's worst attributes heightened to the most highest caliber. I hate the lyrics on here. I think that the musicianship feels so lazy and uninspired. And the lyrics go hand in hand with that, with the band just writing their own tropes to the most idiosyncratic degree. This is bar none the worst album I spun in 2022. And the one thing that put it above MGK is because in a year full of disappointments, while Muse hasn't made a great album in a long time, in my opinion, this is the point where I really think I want to just tap out and never listen to another record of theirs again. Because they've done nothing but continue to get worse as they make music. And this is easily the worst album in their discography and the lowest point that the band has ever reached when delivering an album-style experience. And that's what makes it my worst album of 2022. What do you think of these albums? Were there some that you liked on this list? Did you hate all of these albums like I did? Let me know in the comments down below. If you did like this list, be sure to give it a like. If you want to see more of my music, gaming, and general nerdery content, be sure to subscribe. Thank you again so very much for watching. I've been Viral Rack. You guys have good days, lives, and situations. Tomorrow we're going to be talking about the best albums, and I'll see you another day.